So hello to all viewers and listeners. My name is Radovana Dluhého, and I would like to give a warm welcome to Jim Lee. Jim, thank you very much to agree to the interview. I need to say right up front, Jim's website, climateviewer.com, I think it's the best source of reliable information about weather and climate modification. It's history that goes back 70 and more years. Jim's website is full of studies, research papers, mainstream articles from universities, governments, NASA, NOAA, and so on. I really recommend it. It's an incredible website full of verified educational resources. Of course, we will include the link to Jim's website and to many other links under the video. Jim, what to say about you in the intro? You spent more than a decade researching the subject of weather and climate modification. You have also participated at the Environmental Protection Agency EPA hearing in 2015, I think, warning about the pollution from jet fuel. You took part at the Weather Modification Conference a few years ago, interviewed many scientists who devoted their lives to weather modification efforts, such as the university professor James Fleming. By the way, we managed to translate his book, Fixing the Sky, to the Czech language. So I'm very excited about that. Would you like to add anything about yourself in the intro, Jim?
Just generally, you know, I've been married 24 years, better get that right. I have a 13-year-old and 7-year-old daughter. I live in Sumter, South Carolina in USA, and, I'm just dedicated to this topic. It's always been a passion project. It's never been about, you know, I never wanted to be famous. I never wanted my face on any of my videos. I literally just wanted the truth out there about this topic. And unfortunately, I didn't see anybody else on YouTube doing it right. They would sprinkle truth in with a whole lot of what I refer to as fear porn. To clarify, there are so many people who are addicted to pornography on the internet, and equally as many people who are addicted to fear. And there are so many people who capitalize on that addiction to fear that's where the numbers are at. And if I had started, 15 years ago, just being scary, I'd probably be rich by now. But I'm not going to, compromise my morals just to make a buck. So I've stuck to the facts. I try to give people all the same material that I'm using as a reference, because I believe that the only way for us to ever get action on these topics of, weather modification, space weather modification, geoengineering, is so that, my viewers, the people who go to my websites, they're just as educated as I am.
Right. And I have been following you for many years now. And so I have to say that I really appreciate that about you, that, the subject and the information sometimes is scary, almost sci-fi for people, but you stick to facts and let the viewers, create their own, how I would say, emotions about it. Like, try, make them to make up the mind about the subject. So, let me go to my first question. And it's about cloud seeding. I've, as I said, I have studied a lot of your material over the years, and, for the Czech public, thanks to your sources, I created also some presentations translated to Czech. So I would like to take advantage and use this interview as kind of pulling things together, if you're okay about that. Not covering the basics, but, over the years, some kind of questions rose to my mind. And so I would like to kind of pull things together. So, in terms of cloud seeding, which is one of the most popular weather modification methods. Anyway, that's what the mainstream kind of mentions, right? They say that, we use, or the commercial, the companies, the governments, the military uses mainly silver iodide that's being injected into the clouds. But we know that there are many patents or studies confirming the possible use of bacteria, different metals, polymers, urea, graphene oxide nanoparticles. It's directly from the recent MIT study. But also, and that's what I want to focus on, very harmful carbon black dust. Since the 1950s, there have been many scientists or scientific academic papers that analyze over and over the use of carbon black dust. So what do you think about the possibility of using all these pretty harmful elements in today's weather climate modification programs, and especially the carbon black dust?
I think that when you look at it, there's two perspectives on this. You have the scientist perspective, which is just what's going to be the most effective. So they don't really ask, can I? They ask, well, they don't ask should I? They ask can I? So at the end of the day, for them, it's just a simple, can I actually produce rain with this chemical? And health effects, all of that, we'll figure that out later. And I think that that's true across any industry you look at, whether it's the food industry or, drilling or any industry I've ever looked into, nuclear, of course. They don't ask about, the unintended side effects or the human health effects. They simply ask, is this effective? And, they get to their modeling in the computer lab, and then they go to their outdoor experiments, and then they go making promises to people who are going to throw money at them. You make it rain on me, I'll make it rain on you. I hope this doesn't get lost in translation, but it's a common term in rap music. You make money rain on somebody.
Right.
They make it rain. So you make it rain on me, I'll make it rain on you. But this has been a commonality going back to the early 1900s. There's always been individuals who will make promises based on monetary gain, and the outcome of which is always unknown. Because in a chaotic weather system, the atmosphere is very chaotic. It's not like any other kind of statistical probability study where you have a certain number of known factors that you can plug into a computer model, and you could say, we have a 90% certainty that this is going to happen. With weather, with long-term climate engineering, there is no statistical, certainty whatsoever, even on the smallest cloud seeding project. So as far as the focus on carbon black dust, you really see a divergence. Whereas commercial cloud seeding projects traditionally use silver iodide, which is basically a silver salt. Since 1946, when Bernard Vonnegut, Irving Langmuir, and Vincent Schaefer invented it at the General Electric labs, that's been the predominant chemical for over 60, 70 years. And it's recently that ionization methods, or just producing negatively charged ions, using nanotechnology, with the graphene, titanium oxide, silicon dioxide, specifically at the United Arab Emirates rainfall enhancement program. All of this kind of comes about because basically the UAE realized, well, we're rich and we got a lot of money, but we don't have a lot of rain. And they started the UAE rep as a way to kind of, foster international cooperation, which is just generally like, hey, we have this lottery fund here in the UAE, and anybody from anywhere in the world, if you can make it rain here, we will make it rain on you. And that's why you're seeing these rapid advances in cloud seeding technology because of the money that's behind it, driving people for innovation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then as far as the carbon black side, you see a history of the United States military in particular focusing on carbon black, as you mentioned, as early as 1958, when Dr. Florence Van Straten was producing clouds using just carbon black dust thrown out of the back of a plane, literally in powder form, in liquid form. You see it again in the 70s with carbon black dust absorption of solar radiation, the idea that William Gray and company put forward to steer hurricanes. Well, what's old is new. And in 2008, the Department of Homeland Security here in America put forward this idea. A gentleman by the name of Mosh Alamaro from MIT University basically regurgitated what was said in the 70s. Why don't we dump carbon black dust into hurricanes to steer them? And the idea is that because carbon black is black, it absorbs heat, much like if your car was painted black. So if your car's painted black, it's been sitting in the sun all day long, you know not to just go over there and sit on it because it's going to burn your butt cheeks. And it's very similar to that. So they believed that they could dump enough carbon black dust into cold pools or different sections of the hurricane to heat it.
Right.
And by heating that portion of the hurricane, alter its path.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, the United States Air Force and Navy both had Freedom of Information Act requests. These are, government appeals to divulge information, in which both branches of the military stated that, yes, they had active programs to use carbon black dust for weather warfare purposes. And this was finalized in 1997 when Dr. Arnold Barnes from the United States Air Force Phillips Lab gave a presentation to a joint Army Air Force, it's called the Weather Test Technology Symposium 97, where he did a PowerPoint presentation, and it included 2 slides that said cloud seeding using carbon black.
Right. I have the presentation. I know what you're talking about.
And it gave all the same reasons that they did during, Operation Popeye, weather warfare over Vietnam. It literally has a copy paste from Owning the Weather in 2025 as one of the slides, as one of the reasons. And they finish the presentation with current capabilities 1997. And it says create/suppress cirrus/contrails. So when you look at it from a military perspective, controlling clouds for military purposes has always been done, and probably until they invent something better, be done with carbon black. So I see the difference there specifically, that carbon black is almost always associated with the military, unless you're talking about pollution from airplanes.
Right. And
unless you're talking about, burnt jet fuel, which also just produces carbon black dust. Soot.
Yeah, we'll get to that. You know what amazes me or maybe shocks me is the better word. How lightly often the experts, so-called experts and scientists, speak about this stuff, even Mr. Barnes, he talks about carbon black dust to you. I mean, it's has negative health effects, right? Or, you mentioned
certainly
Florence Van Straten in the 50s, how excited she, is about, throwing down carbon black dust on people. But we can go, to current times when you have Ken Caldera or David Keith or Alan Robock, one of the greatest geoengineers, talking about, how I think it was Ken Caldera speaking on the video how in a secret meeting he kind of discusses the use of pathogens for cloud seeding, right? I think it was Ken Caldera.
He was referring to he briefly was working at Livermore, Lawrence Livermore National Labs, and he was working with Edward Teller, Roderick Hyde, and Lowell Wood. And Lowell Wood is belovingly known as Dr. Evil. And yeah, he was just bragging about a conversation that he had. And I don't think that he realized that the words coming out of his mouth were going to end up on YouTube. Right. But yeah, when you're talking to weapons experts, because that's what they are, they're defense contractors. Right. They design weapons, whether they want to admit that what their technology will end up, designing will become a weapon. They will vehemently go, "Oh, it was just a normal discussion. Nothing to see here. We didn't actually do that." But somebody somewhere in that room was with a sheet of paper going, "This is a pretty good idea." Like write all this down.
Yeah, it's useful. Yeah. Jim, in your presentations, you give many examples how the government, companies, academia, military expand from more chemical, biological cloud seeding to using laser, sound, or electromagnetic waves. You already mentioned, right, cloud ionizations. I think that's the company called Meteor Systems. And they also use the ionospheric technology. The company you have, I think, on your website is the Climate Global Control Trading. I think they are both located in the United Arab Emirates. Do you think that over the last few decades, these entities have shifted from cloud seeding to using these modern technologies, or they are being used alongside with cloud seeding? And maybe it's you already kind of talk about the military. It's a different ballgame.
I think that, they will employ all of the above. However, the ionization method, if you're being, fair about it, is probably it is the cleanest version of weather modification there is, because to make it rain, you only need three things. You need water vapor, you need a cloud seed or a cloud condensation nuclei, CCN as they refer to it, some little granule that the water can stick to, and you need something to make it stick, or static electricity, ionization. So as long as you have these three things, then you can make basically water condensed till it gets large enough to fall as rain. So if you're artificially cloud seeding, you're putting more cloud seeds up there for water to stick to. If you're doing ionization methods, then you could simply be using the pollution that's already in the atmosphere to make the water vapor stick to it. None of these work if there is no water vapor. So that, you could make the argument that if there weren't water vapor there, that just simply burning jet fuel produces water vapor. So we've come to this situation where you really can't tell what natural weather is anymore, because there are so many individuals worldwide that are simultaneously conducting massive weather modification experiments. Not, they'll always spin it as small scale. You'll hear this in every single, journal, every single news, rag on the internet. They'll say, well, cloud seeding is generally small scale. Until you consider the fact that China is literally covering the entire Himalayan mountains. I mean, 2/3 the size of Spain, I believe, was the size they quoted, with hundreds of thousands of ground-based cloud seeding generators. So you can no longer make the argument that it's small scale. In America, we have the Rocky Mountains, and they run from Mexico all the way to Canada. And all along them are thousands of cloud seeding generators that operate from October through March of every single year. That is not small scale,
right.
You know, unless you're just talking about one individual cloud seeding generator. You have to look at it from the macro,
right.
Especially when you're talking about large, you know, weather systems that travel, you know, from this continent to the next. What are the downwind effects? You know, what kind of climate chaos are they creating? Because you go back to the, you know, James Roger Fleming's argument, the butterfly effect. In private conversations I had with him, and maybe you saw the interview from the weather modification conference. Right. He coined a new term, the Mothra effect.
Mothra effect, yeah. Right.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to get the answer out of him on was, you know, well, what about whenever we're talking about all of these, you know, on this grand scale that we're talking about today, it's no longer a butterfly effect. We're talking about, you know, a mythical creature from a Godzilla movie size butterfly flapping its wings. And that's the part that's, you know, not well understood or discussed in the media. You won't hear anything about that.
Right. And I think it was Irving Langmuir, right, who said that even what almost just a small cup of silver iodide under the right conditions can create the energy equal to the atomic bomb, which he said, I think
he said 30 milligrams.
Yeah, exactly. So when you take that, all the cloud seeding, you know, that's happening. And I think, is it the Climate Global Control Trading Company that brags on their website that they can steer atmospheric rivers in the area of the size of India? I mean, I don't think we're talking about weather modification anymore. I mean, it's definitely climate modification. If you can steer rivers, I mean, that's
it's not just them. And I'll get back to Climate Control Global Trading LLC in just a moment. But in addition to them, a company formerly known as Acquiesce, which is now known as Miles Research, which is David Miles. I actually interviewed him. And China has what they call the Sky River program, or I think it's Tianhe. My pronunciation might be off a little bit, but the Tianhe or Tianhe project, which is translated as Sky River, they also have plans to do the cloud seeding on the Himalayas, but then somehow transfer all of that rainfall to the northwestern part of China. And they talk about doing this through the movement of atmospheric rivers and obviously through, you know, rivers, dams, and all of that sort of stuff. So they're doing literal geoengineering, you know, and transforming nature to make all of that rainfall from the Tibetan plateau reach the northwest of China. Now, when you're talking about something on that scale, right. I mean, that changes the entire northern hemisphere.
Right.
And I specifically asked James Roger Fleming about the Chinese plan. And I said, even though this is cloud seeding, even though this is considered weather modification, is something on this scale not only the Mothra we were talking about, but could this be considered geoengineering? And he responded to me in a tweet, yes, this is of a scope and scale that would be considered geoengineering. And the ETC group, who run geoengineeringmonitor.org, they're the world's largest and most effective anti-geoengineering NGO, non-governmental organization. They put out a bulletin that basically China's Himalayan activity is basically creating technology that could easily be translated to a geoengineering program at any given moment. So we're really in this. Is it geoengineering? Is it weather modification? It's both.
Right.
And that's where the lines are starting to blur.
Yeah. People often ask me about if this technology can be misused, right? And I just recently saw this video. It was, I think, mainstream US TV. I don't know if it was ABC or NBC. There was a short interview with Mikio Kaku, this scientist who talks about the use of laser for weather modification. And as a side note, I mean, what's going on right now in Hawaii, especially on the island of Maui, right? There's this talk on the internet, and the fact checkers quickly dismiss it that there might have been the use of lasers and direct energy weapons during the current fires in Hawaii. And, it's fact checkers were saying it's a conspiracy theory. I kind of checked into it a little bit, and I found out that there is actually kind of a new installation of direct energy weapons in Maui on the same island. And this head of this division, I think his name is Kelly Hammett. He kind of brags about that they installed the first ever operational directed energy weapon, and it's right on the island of Maui. And I go, why didn't the fact checkers actually, mention that? I mean, it doesn't really prove anything, right? But not mentioning it in their fact checking, I think these $1 million mainstream medias that just like dismiss everything and make you look an idiot, but just don't mention it. That just kind of blows me away. Do you have any information about that?
Yeah, I'm looking at his, you mentioned his name, hadn't heard of him. Former Air Force Research Lab official Kelly Hammett takes over as Space RCO Director 2022. Yeah. I can tell you this. On climateviewer.org, I map out, different installations around the world. And at the Maui Observatory, which is, on top of a mountain, there are several lasers. Some of them are GeoDSS. They're always in triplicates. So you'll get 3 lasers, and they're specifically for tracking satellites. Let's just put it that way. And, outer space objects, near Earth asteroids, debris, so like shuttle body, rocket bodies that are just floating in space, things like that. So this is part of what's called the space fence. And then there's another laser that's just a little further away from the Maui installation. But you have to look at it like this. If you have a directed energy weapon, which is, that's the catchphrase that everybody just wants to stick to, and it's on the ground and it's pointed at the sky, how do you light a fire on the ground with a laser that cannot hit the ground?
Oh, there's some kind of space mirrors or something, maybe.
Yeah, this
to reflect it.
I always, I shy away from the whole, because like I said, this is another one of those, in my personal opinion, I could be wrong. And the day we all agree is the day we could all be wrong. But based on what I know and how the atmosphere works, how thick it is, and how hard it is to transmit a high powered microwave beam, let alone a laser from space with enough energy to burn the ground, it seems extremely more plausible that a dude with a big, lighter lights a fire than, some space-based platform is firing directed energy weapons to light fires. Right. And most of the videos, and I've watched so many because people send me everything. And a little background. I also, I'm a graphics artist. I've done 3D graphics design. I've designed video games. So I'm very analytical when it comes to computer and graphics. And time after time, what I see is lens flares from very bright objects being described as direct proof of directed energy weapons when it's clearly a lens flare. You know, that they have this, you know, bright white area and then, you know, a line going up into the sky. And they don't understand, you know, how a CCD and a camera works, or, you know, the fact that, you know, that lens flares are even possible, I guess. But I have never seen a video of what, because I've seen directed energy weapons, the real ones, and what they actually look like. You're not going to see some bright beam coming from the sky. In fact, if you
basically don't see anything, right?
Yeah. If you had a properly functioning directed energy weapon, space-based laser, the chances of you actually seeing it are slim to none.
Right.
It would make much more sense that it would be almost invisible. So this isn't like the, you know, Val Kilmer movie, My Science Project, you know, where they were basically built a laser out in space and then filled a guy's house with popcorn and heated it up. You know, people always think of, you know, what Hollywood shows you, you know, a space-based laser would look like. However, the amount of energy required to pull it off is astronomical. Let's just go ahead and start there. So if you were to use a directed energy weapon, a high powered laser, it is it's more probable that it would be from an unmanned aerial vehicle, a drone, or a large military craft, you know, airplane, than something in space at this time. Because when you're going through, you know, 300, 500 miles worth of atmosphere, you start out at, you know, with a power, you know, density of, you know, let's say 1 million watts in space. And by the time it reaches the ground, we're talking like 45 watts. This is just fundamental science, because all along that path, it's being absorbed by all the molecules in the way, and especially water vapor as it descends into the atmosphere, which is going to absorb all that heat. It's going to take away that radiation. So yeah, there's a lot of people who constantly, you know, putting these videos out saying the California wildfires were all, oh, look at the burnt cars. That's proof. And I find it, you know, somewhat laughable, you know, that they hijack the narrative that somehow, all wildfires are now directed energy weapons.
It's so easy to sensationalize things, right? And, I mean, it's true that there are, how would I say, theories, concepts that are being proven in the academia, like disaster capitalism, right? That, you know, that people are being displaced for not very nice reasons, but I would agree with those, truth, but right?
I think it's the method that I think they discredit the entire idea that somebody could have a nefarious intention to burn out an area. One that was put to me just recently was, you know, the wildfires in southeast Australia that happened to coincide with where they want to put some high-speed train down. And they're like, well, you know, look at how they're burning us out so that they can make way for this high-speed train. And, you know, similar discussions about directed energy weapons were used. I'm like, but, you know, for $50 and a bag of cocaine, I can get 10 guys to go out with lighters and just light the ground. So, you know, I think that people aren't realistic about it. And I think it's intentional. Right. You know, the algorithms, these social media giants, I call them the Silicon Mafia. They will prop these videos up, even though they know that they're not true. So, like, you see, like, in the case of most videos, they would say, well, we're fighting misinformation, unless the misinformation is beneficial. Right. And if the misinformation is beneficial to your narrative that you want people to think, oh, these people are just crazy. You know, we would never intentionally burn an area to get, you know, run people off their land and then buy it up for, literally a fire sale. But that's what the BlackRock and Vanguard, corporate elites do. Disaster capitalism is a real thing. It's the methodology that I think gets lost in, to the sensationalists, the fear porn pushers, the clickbait monsters.
And I think we need to realize that, like the Operation Mockingbird, where all the mainstream, a lot of mainstream media has been infiltrated by these FBI, CIA agents to kind of, like you say, it's a good point, to create a story that, they can just use to discredit people. So that's a good point. But at the same time, a lot of these things are, it's difficult not to get to that, because when you, for instance, read or these bold statements on how how nature weather can be used for weather control or even weaponized for warfare. There's so many, like in the 60s, the US vice president, right, Lyndon Johnson's talking about causing floods and droughts and changing the tides and raise the levels from space. And then William Cohen, right, in the 90s, the Secretary of Defense, speaking about altering the climate and setting off earthquakes and volcanoes through the use of electromagnetic waves.
Yeah.
Then,
eco-terrorism.
Right. So it's difficult not to, they say it. So how do we kind of stick to the truth when these things are possible according to these politicians or scientists?
Well, if you dig back into it, so in 1968, there was an idea that was put forward called the solar powered satellite. So the genesis of this, actual directed energy weapon in space is completely lost on most of the morons that are, out there espousing that a directed energy weapon was used. So a little bit of history is probably in order. In 1968, there was a proposal from the Department of Energy in the U.S. To create a solar powered satellite and then beam that down, that energy collected in space from solar, panels, to a rectenna. So a rectangular antenna would look a lot like HARP, a big square on the ground with a bunch of antennas. However, that the size that they were talking about was 100 square kilometers of, platform to collect that radiation. Okay. And then there would have to be all these precautions put in place to make sure that the beam is on target. It doesn't, fluctuate. There is no refraction or diffraction, that it, there's no beam scattering. There's so many things involved in this. And the quote that stuck out with me from the hearings that happened as a result of this was, as long as the United States considered it green energy, it could not be considered a weapon system. Oh. So what you now see today, this actually happened last year. The University of Caltech launched a solar powered satellite, and a lot of people latched onto this, and they said, well, they actually beamed it down. They've got an actual solar powered satellite up there. What they failed to mention was, in the test, they collected some energy with some solar panels, and they used a directed energy weapon, beam, to beam it 1 foot away to light up some LEDs. Okay, so that was almost the entire experiment. But then they also wanted to see, could we beam it down to Earth? So with the same satellite, they did beam it down to the roof of the Caltech University, where they were able to catch a couple watts. Or as they put it, we had a detectable signal. Now, to scale this up, in the case of the solar-powered satellite back in 1968, they were talking about solar panels over a mile in length. Around, like, let's say 2 to 3 kilometers in total of satellite in space. And then you've got all of the conversion technology and then the beam forming technology that would go into that to create this beam powerful enough to then get it to the ground. The problem with all of this, even in 1968, they recognized that it would cause local weather modification, that it would cause ground-based soil erosion because all of the heat that would be transferred to the area. So how do you actually cool the receiving antenna on the ground enough to keep it from just melting? And that this would cause long-term climate modification, all of which was stated in the original, discussions in 1968. Now, to be fair, since then, Japan has launched a solar-powered satellite. I believe China has as well. Obviously, Caltech, there was a power company in California that did a trial of a solar-powered satellite. These are things that are real, that you can talk about and to be factual. However, that since 1968 to today, nobody has been able to produce a powerful enough beam to actually do any damage, let alone collect enough power to light, to turn my computer on. Right. Okay. I got 1,000-watt power supply in this computer. It would, they can't beam enough energy from space to turn my computer on. How the hell are they going to launch a bunch of fires?
Right.
Now, I would flip the script. I'm going to put my conspiracy hat on right now, because I like to be devil's advocate, play devil's advocate as well. I think they missed the whole point, because if you go back to 1929, the idea of the sun gun or space-based, magnifying glasses. The Nazis in Germany literally referred to trying to create a sun gun. What is commonly referred to as an artificial ionospheric mirror has been now redubbed a laser developed atmospheric lens, or LDAL, by BAE Systems. It's the same technology that HAARP uses to create an artificial ionospheric mirror, a plasma fireball in space, that they can reflect radio waves off of. However, BAE Systems was talking about using a space-based drone with a laser to paint a ionizing pattern on the ionosphere to pretty much, superheat a portion of the sky to create a magnifying glass. Now, for them, they said the purpose of it was so that whenever they're using spy, cameras, that they could look through that atmospheric lens and super enhance the ability to spy, like literally count your nose hairs from space. Now, if you can do that, then anybody who has ever had a magnifying glass and lit a leaf on fire with sun knows that if you create a magnifying glass using our atmosphere, is that a directed energy weapon? It technically, you are directing the energy of the sun, which is thousands, if not hundreds of thousand times, stronger than any conventional laser or energy weapon on the planet. If you can direct the energy of the sun using an atmospheric lens, now we're talking a whole new ball game. Right. By the way, also would probably be invisible.
Right. Great point, Jim. You mentioned HAARP and, the ionospheric technologies that basically are mobile all over the world. I mean, people like to speak about HAARP, but there are others, IceCat, Sutra in Japan, in Peru, and all that. But, what stick to my mind, you cite the work of university professor Papadopoulos from the University of Maryland, right? Yeah. That's very interesting because, it's an academic paper or presentation, and he says that it's possible thanks to these technologies, to send extremely low frequencies back to Earth, right? And these these technologies revive or are based on the patents of the previous scientists and like the entrepreneur Bernard Eastlund, right, who stated that using this technology, you can change the weather by redirecting the very high wind patterns, the jet stream, and even go back to Nikola Tesla, right? I found some paper.
Oh, yeah.
And so, that has a lot of different multiple impacts, right? One is changing the weather, the jet streams, like what the company does, right? The climate global control trading, but it can have more repercussions for earthquakes and setting up volcanoes, because that's exactly what the extremely low frequencies do, right? Do I understand it correctly? Like, the mining companies use these extremely low frequencies to look for oil. And I think I saw this film called Holes in Heaven or something like that.
Yeah, that was
and
Nick Begich.
Yeah, so what do you, can HAARP-like technologies be used for weather modification or even for more nefarious things like earthquakes or volcanoes and things like that?
Yes and no. Yes, with the right amount of power. No, today. If you actually read Bernard Eastlund's work, and interesting you mentioned that film, because I actually was working with the director of the film, Paula Randall Smith, on a sequel to that film. And I did an interview with Nick Begich, and the film obviously never got made. COVID hit, and funding hasn't come through. I haven't heard from her in quite a while. But regardless, she was, still on that same kind of tip, that, HAARP was controlling worldwide weather and all of that sort of stuff. Now, it's the same concept that I was talking about earlier. You have to consider what, it's called power density. So HAARP has 3.6 million watts going into it. When you figure in watts plus what's called dB gain, or the efficiency of the antenna, you come to what's called an effective radiated power. So though HAARP has 3.6 million watts generated by diesel engines, which they named Angels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, after the movie, Angels don't play this HAARP. Right. Even the people at HAARP have a sense of humor. I know this because I have Dr. Chris Fallon, who was the director of HAARP. I did a PowerPoint presentation on HAARP, and I wanted, I was like, let me go to somebody who could fact check me. So I sent it to Chris. And I said, Chris, you're the director of HAARP. Tell me how close to true what I got here is. He said, it's 100% accurate. I agree with everything you said. This is better than most of my students, could ever put together, all except that last slide. I agree with everything you said. And of course, the last slide was about Fukushima and the heating of the ionosphere over Fukushima before the meltdown. So he agreed with everything but that part. And I'm fine with that. I totally understand why he would not agree with that part. But the reality of the situation is that the effective radiated power of HAARP is 5.1 billion watts. So even though you put 3.6 million watts in, because of the gain, because of the efficiency of the antennas, you get to a magic number of 5.1 billion watts, or gigawatts. Now, if you go back to Bernard Eastlund's original documentation, when he was talking about what he called COSIP, cosmics, it's been a minute. I could pull up the term, but anyway, his original patents called for an antenna array approximately 100 times larger than HAARP in order to control the weather, because the magic number that he came up with was 100 billion watts.
Oh, I see.
Okay. Because you have to consider how much energy is coming in from the sun. You have to overcome what's already coming in from the sun. And you have to have a certain power density focused on a certain area over a long enough period to be able to interrupt the jet stream. So 100 gigawatts or gigawatts is what, the consensus is the magic number. So currently, no ionospheric heater on the planet can do that. However, at the Tromsø array in Scandinavia, they have decided to upgrade it. And this is through ISCAT. They're building what's called the ISCAT 3D array. So it's an upgrade to the Tromsø ionospheric heater to, get this, 100 gigawatts.
Wow.
So they have the plan to upgrade to 100 gigawatts, which just happens to coincide with what Bernard Eastlund said. Hey, this is how much power we would need to be able to alter the jet stream. So does that make more sense?
Right. And do you think it can also work in conjunction with like the NEXRADs or the meteor radars, or is it completely separate? Can it be kind of used to maybe enhance the power or facilitate the? Because people often send me, recently actually it's just so reoccurring. I mean, if you look at the sky and the weather patterns, people send me. We have a couple military bases, and there are radars. And I'm not sure, you cannot really access the base, but we see like a lot of frequencies being, you can see them on the weather map. And basically, the front just sticks here and doesn't move. The clouds don't move, and it just sits here. And, can these radars that we have, the military bases that you see, these frequencies that are being generated, is it completely separate thing, or can they be used to manipulate the weather?
So this is one that it's pretty upsetting to most people, because when I started out, there was a guy named Dutch Sense, and he had started the term HARP rings. Okay. This is around 2010 through about 2012. And I just basically made the argument to him. I said, could you stop calling them HARP rings? Because there's only one HARP. HARP is in Alaska. They are not HARP. They are NEXRADs. They are Doppler radars. They are what we call WSR-88Ds, or Weather Service Radar 1988 Delta. So they have been upgraded to, they've had an upgrade to them called, the dipole, upgrade, but still you have to consider power density. And a NEXRAD, Doppler radar puts out about 750,000 watts. So we're talking less than 1 million watts, but here's the part that people miss. Because it's an on-off type of radar and it's pulsing, that 750,000 watts. If you factor in the time between the pulses, the average power density coming off a NEXRAD is somewhere around 50 watts. Mm-hmm. So there's this common misconception that, and it's pervasive. Like some of my, best friend followers, still to this day want to convince me that NEXRAD Doppler radars are steering the weather. And I'm like, but dude, I have literally been looking for this smoking gun evidence for 15 years. Like, I want to be the guy that says, look, proof, this Doppler radar altered this storm. Right. However, in order for you to be able to prove this, you need to show causation. You need to show some kind of reaction. So if we'll just take this for example. If this is your Doppler radar and a cloud is coming in, then you should be able to see something like this. If the cloud changes direction, or if the cloud just rapidly dissipates, or anything, I should be able to see a change in the weather, not just, I saw some funky beams coming off of it. So I think that to the uninitiated, to the less tech savvy, it is fancy to look at. It does look interesting, especially when you're looking at base reflectivity or any of these sorts of things. I was fascinated and I was fooled for the first 3 to 4 years that I was doing this. I believed with every being of my soul that, yes, these Doppler radars were definitely changing the weather. The longer I do this, the more I go, that's probably highly unlikely. Even more so when you're talking about ionospheric modification, because Doppler radars, if this were your Doppler radar, the beams come out this way, okay, in a cone. So they spread out to the side. They are not pointed up. Then the ionosphere is directly up. They have a range of about 45 degrees that they can point up and down. So no Doppler radar on the planet points up, directly up into the sky. If you want to be concerned about Doppler radars, be concerned if there's one within about, let's say, 500 meters, a half a mile from your house, and you live on the 3rd floor of a building, then you might want to be considered about, worried about EMF danger to your health, getting cancer because you're being flooded by, high powered microwave beam every, 30 seconds, however long that takes it to make its full rotation. But there are people that literally live, 3rd, 4th, 5th floor of a building, and that Doppler radar beam is swinging through their house. Now that's a serious concern. But I have yet to, and I can honestly say that I've seen over 1,000 videos. Right. Not to mention my, spending my own time just, seeing weather systems, getting into what's called NEXRAD level 3 data, which the public doesn't even have access to. And I'm not going to say how I have access to it. Let's just say a friend, pointed me in the right direction. So I can see all of the unfiltered data, from all of these different devices. And I'm looking at it and I'm just looking for that one video, where I can see a cloud coming in, and then either a pencil beam or what's called test mode, or any kind of like directed heating. Like say they stop the rotation of the Doppler radar and they focus it on a given location. Did that focusing of the beam cause localized heating, which with an increase in heat comes an increase in pressure? This is basic science crap. With that increase in heat, did it change the direction of a storm? Right. Did it alter the path of a storm? And nobody, and I could say this with 100% certainty, nobody on the internet has that evidence, period, end of story. And if you do have that evidence, I challenge you, email me, jim@climateviewer.com. Because if you do, and you have caught that on tape, if you've got that recording, I'm going to be the first one to say, look, now we have proof. Right. The closest I've ever come to it was there was a case where I know that HAARP was on, and HAARP is a whole nother animal. We're talking, tens, if not hundreds of times more powerful than any NEXRAD. And it was operational, and a storm front was coming into Alaska, and you could literally see the clouds almost like hit a wall. Right. So the clouds are coming in, they kind of They're coming in like this and they hit this wall and then they kind of curve around and go underneath it. Now, that could be explained by what I was talking about with the loss of energy in the atmosphere. So if you've got this 5.1 billion watts of energy that you're beaming up to 300 to 500 kilometers in space, locally, at 10, 20,000 feet, they have radars that say planes do not fly in this area. HARP is on. Mm-hmm. So they're called alert radar. And during that operation, you could clearly see the clouds. I didn't record it. I turned my OBS on. I went to do the screen grab as fast as I could.
Oops.
And, of course, I don't remember the time and date. I can't go back in time to now catch that video animation of the clouds. But it was the only time I ever saw anything even remotely close to a electromagnetic beam altering the weather.
Right.
But let's be real. You were mentioning lasers earlier. The thing that people don't understand about lasers are that lasers can be used for weather modification purposes. Ground-based lasers. The opposite of what we were talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. People want to focus on lasers in space lighting fires. They don't want to talk about lasers on the ground steering lightning bolts.
Right.
And the idea of creating laser lightning rods has been around for about 10 years. It's probably been longer, but feasible in the last 10 years. And it's picking up steam. The idea that you could protect critical infrastructure. Say you got a nuclear waste dump. Well, you don't want a lightning bolt hitting that.
Right.
So they literally set up, originally it was rockets with wires trailing behind them. They would fire the rocket into a thunderstorm, and then when the lightning would strike, it would follow the path of least resistance, which was that wire, all the way down to the ground. So I have photos on climateviewer.com of straight lightning. Okay. And the same is true with lasers, that they can use lasers to steer lightning bolts, which begs the question, if you can do it from the ground, can you do it from above a storm?
Right.
So you don't need an extremely powerful, laser to do this. You're just basically creating a wire in the sky.
Right, Jim.
It's an ionized channel that the lightning will follow.